New signs are emerging that the era of globalization may be shifting. Among the telling signs are rising protectionism and growing trade tensions globally, especially between the U.S. and China. That has prompted the World Bank to cut its global GDP growth forecast for this year to 2.3%, the weakest non-recession level in 3 decades. The World Bank also projected global trade growth at only 1.8% this year, down sharply from 3.4% last year. The World Trade Organization also warns of more disruption to global trade because of Trump's tariff policies. Signs are showing that more businesses are turning inward, redrawing supply chains closer to home. Some analysts call this the beginning of a second draft of globalization, marked by stronger regional blocs such as BRICS, the EU, and ASEAN, possibly replacing the old multilateral order. So what does this mean for companies and leaders shaping the global economy? To unpack this, we're joined by Professor David Bach. He's president of IMD Business School in Lausanne, Switzerland, and a World Economic Forum expert who also teaches the acclaimed course, The End of Globalization. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Singapore. I really appreciate you making the time to speak with us today. Let's look at what's been happening in the world in the last couple of days. There's no end in sight to the wars in Gaza and Ukraine, and now conflict has broken out between Israel and Iran. Globalization was supposed to help prevent wars. What has happened?
No, you're absolutely correct. I think we've lived a period of unprecedented stability, low interest rates, trade liberalization, this sort of notion of a one-way street of globalization. What we're realizing right now is it can go in the other direction. We can get disintegration. We can get more conflicts, particularly if we don't have global leadership. And that's the situation that we're seeing right now.
So does this signal that the era of globalization has ended, or is it simply evolving?
I would say it's a rewiring of globalization, right? Again, we're moving away from this idea of one direction where you can always count on everything getting easier when it comes to trade and foreign direct investment. Instead, what we're seeing is fractures. We're seeing regional alliances, as you just mentioned. So companies are going to continue to operate across borders. They just can't assume that they can go wherever they can get the best price or wherever you have the most customers. The politics become really, really important as you make these decisions.
You mentioned these companies. What does this mean for global CEOs and firms? How exactly will this have a roll-on effect on supply chains?
Well, you see, at IMD, we work with a lot of senior executives. And I think the challenge they face is today's CEOs have really developed their careers over the last 25, 30 years. And that has been a period really when, sure, with bumps, the global financial crisis, the war on terror, there have been challenges. But they've grown up in a world in which they assumed that inflation is going to be low, interest rates are going to be low, trade barriers are low and are coming down, right? That you can source from anywhere. And that's not true anymore. So they have to rapidly learn what many of their predecessors knew, which is politics can get in the way of what might otherwise make good business sense.
So could this changing landscape usher in something new or better for the global economy? Are you optimistic?
I'm always optimistic. I think there are lots of opportunities for companies everywhere. But I think we are going to require a group of leaders who have more political acumen, who understand that business does not operate in isolation. But the opportunities are still plentiful.
Let's look at President Trump's tariff war. How do you see this playing out in the coming weeks and months?
So who knows, right? You look at the trade policy uncertainty index, and it's literally off the chart. So the amount of uncertainty is unprecedented. That's almost the bigger issue than the tariffs themselves. So, companies can adjust to tariffs. I've spoken with many CEOs, and they said, look, if the tariff to enter the U.S. is 5%, 7%, 10%, and we can count on that, we can make decisions about what we make in the U.S., what we export to the U.S., or where we look for other market opportunities. The problem is up, down, exceptions, no exceptions. The uncertainty around that is what is getting in the way of investments. So the hope is that over the next couple of months, we reach some kind of an equilibrium that business leaders can then base expectations around.
A lot of these businesses, though, they're waiting for negotiations on trade to be completed. Usually trade agreements take years to configure and finalize. So how exactly can businesses, CEOs, how can they navigate this ever-changing situation, especially with such a volatile Trump administration?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. This idea that you can, in 60 days or 90 days, conclude these trade agreements is just not realistic. The best you can come up with is a framework. If you look at the language around the US-China negotiations right now, it's a framework around a consensus to continue to work on a plan, right? But I think there is a possibility that in a couple of months we look at this and we say, look, tariffs are going to be around 8%, 10%, 15%, and business leaders get to the point where they can start making decisions about investments again.
For companies based in Asia, especially here in Singapore, which thrives on global trade, what strategies would you recommend to navigate this changing environment?
Well, so it's really important to remember that while the US is the biggest economy in the world, it is not the only game in town. There are lots of other markets, right? So Europe is a massive domestic consumer market if you put it together, 450 million people. You still have a lot of opportunities in China, in India, in Indonesia, in the Gulf region. I was recently in Saudi Arabia, so much energy there. So what I think matters really now is that all the other countries and regions get together and make sure that a rules-based international trade system continues. And in that order, Singapore and Singaporean companies can do extremely well. So let's not get hung up on the uncertainty coming out of the US.
I have one last question for you. I had mentioned regional blocs earlier. What role can these blocs like BRICS, the EU, or ASEAN play in reshaping the global economy?
Those blocs are incredibly important. Why? Because none of their members are as big as the US. If you look at what the US has been trying to do, particularly now under President Trump, is try to negotiate individually with countries. And there, the US, of course, has a big advantage. It's such a bigger economy and global power. But as regional blocs form, the EU, ASEAN, the BRICS, they can coordinate together, they can align, and reduce some of that asymmetry. So I think these blocs will become increasingly important in this more transactional world.
Thank you, Professor, for sharing your very valuable insights with us. We were speaking to Professor David Bach, president of IMD Business School.